The HOA board president slid a letter across the table. You're in violation of Section 4.2 of our covenants. Your fence exceeds the permitted height by 18 inches. You have 30 days to bring it into compliance or face fines of $500 per week. Like the fence I'd built to code was illegal because the HOA said so. Like 30 years of ownership could be erased by covenants filed after I bought the property. What he didn't know was that my deed predated the HOA's formation. By 14 years, this wasn't 18 inches of fence height or covenant compliance. 42 homes, 17 years of aggressive enforcement, an HOA fining, restricting, and controlling properties they'd never had authority over. The board president made the mistake every HOA makes, assuming that because they'd been in power. For years, their rules applied to everyone within their boundaries. They didn't. Over 11 months, I watched the Ridgemont Hills Homeowners Association discover what happens when you enforce covenants against properties never bound by them, and the owner shows up with a deed proving they were never subject to HOA authority. This is the story of how an HOA that spent 17 years collecting fines and dues from properties they had no jurisdiction over collapsed when one homeowner asked to see the original covenant signatures. Not because I wanted to destroy the community, because property law doesn't care how long you've been in charge. It cares who actually agreed to your rules. But let me start from the beginning. Before we dive into, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more interesting stories just like this. My Aunt Claire died on a Thursday in late October, 3 weeks after her 82nd birthday. I got the call from her estate attorney, a kind but efficient woman named Linda Shaw, who told me Claire had left me her property in the Appalachian foothills of North Carolina, 280 acres of wooded land, a creek system, and a private lake. Didn't have children, Linda said. And you were the only family member who stayed in touch. She wanted you to have it. I'd visited Aunt Claire's property twice as a kid, once for a family reunion, once for a summer fishing trip. I remembered the lake, quiet, clear, surrounded by thick forest and hills that rolled into the distance like green waves. It had felt like the end of the world in the best way, isolated, peaceful, untouched. But that was over 20 years ago. Claire had grown reclusive after her husband died, and by the time her health started failing, she'd stopped visiting the property altogether. She'd kept paying the taxes from her retirement account, kept the deed in her name. But she hadn't set foot on the land in nearly a decade. Now, it was mine. I drove out to the property on a Saturday in mid-November. Following the directions Linda had given me, the access road was gravel, narrow, and overgrown in places, winding through dense hardwood forest until it opened onto a clearing where Claire's old cabin sat, small, weathered, but still standing. I parked and walked down toward the lake. The air was cool and sharp, the leaves underfoot thick with the smell of autumn decay. The forest was quiet except for the occasional rustle of wind through the branches and the distant call of crows. And then I saw the lake. It was exactly as I remembered. 12 acres of dark, still water, bordered by pines and oaks, the surface reflecting the gray November sky. The dam sat at the southern end along. Gently sloping earthen structure, built in the 1960s, covered in grass and wildflowers. With a spillway on one side to manage overflow, it was beautiful. But something was wrong. I noticed the tire tracks. First heavy, deep ruts running from the access road down to the dam. They weren't old. The mud in the ruts was still fresh, and the grass on either side had been recently flattened. Someone had been here recently and often. I followed the tracks down to the dam and stopped. They're built directly into the base of the dam itself. It was a concrete structure I didn't recognize below. It's a bunker-like housing, maybe 10 feet wide, with a metal door, electrical conduit running along the outside, and a heavy-duty power line stretching away from the structure toward the east. I walked closer. The concrete was new, definitely not from the 1960s. The metal door had an industrial-grade padlock, and next to the structure sat a small utility shed, also locked, with a weatherproof electrical panel bolted to the outside. What the hell was this? I looked up and traced the power line with my eyes. It ran along a cleared path through the forest, following the ridgeline toward the east toward a gated community I'd passed on the drive-in. Ridgewood Estates. A sprawling subdivision of upscale homes, manicured lawns, and a fancy clubhouse with a sign out front that read Private Community Residents Only. The power line was running from my dam toward Ridgewood. I walked back to my truck, grabbed a pair of bolt cutters from the toolbox, and returned to the shed. The padlock was heavy, but the bolt cutters made quick work of it. I pulled the door open and stepped inside. The shed was packed with equipment. A control panel covered in switches, dials, and indicator lights. A set of large inverters humming quietly, and battery banks stacked along one wall. Their cables neatly bundled and labeled. In the center of it all was a metal housing connected to a series of pipes that ran into the dam itself, a hydroelectric turbine system. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the equipment, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had built a small-scale hydroelectric power system inside my aunt's dam. The system was using the flow of water from the lake to generate electricity, feeding it through the inverters and battery banks and sending it via the power line to Ridgewood Estates. I found a manufacturer's plate bolted to the turbine housing. Systems LLC model MH3500 installed. Now June 2019 output. 35 kilowatts continuous June 2019, 4.5 years ago. While Aunt Claire was still alive, living in an assisted care facility 2 hours away, with no idea what was happening on her property, I searched the shed and found a maintenance log clipped to the inside of the door. The entries were neat, methodical, dated every 2 weeks, 10/15 system running nominal, output 32 kilowatts, cleaned intake filters. J. Hayes Ridgewood maintenance 10/29, checked inverters, replaced battery number 3, output stable. J. Hayes 11/12 routine inspection, all systems operational. J. Hayes every entry was signed by someone from Ridgewood HOA. I stepped out of the shed and stood on the dam looking out over the lake. The water was still dark, beautiful. But beneath the surface, someone had drilled into my aunt's dam, installed a turbine system, and had been siphoning power from her property for over 4 years, without permission, without payment, without her knowledge. I pulled out my phone and called Linda Shaw. Linda, it's me. I'm at the property. There's a hydroelectric system built into the dam. Did my aunt ever grant an easement or sign an agreement with the HOA next? Door. Linda was quiet for a moment. Not that I'm aware of. I handled all her estate documents, and I don't recall anything about an easement or utility agreement. Why? Because there's a $400,000 power system built into her dam, and it's been running for 4 years. I don't think she had any idea it was there. Jesus, Linda said. You need to check the county records. If there's no recorded easement, then they're trespassing. I drove to the county clerk's office Monday morning and requested all recorded documents related to Aunt Claire's property deeds, easements, liens, encumbrances, anything that mentioned Ridgewood Estates or utility agreements. The clerk came back 20 minutes later with a thin folder. That's it? I asked. That's it? Warranty deed from 1987 when your aunt and her husband purchased the property. Tax records. No easements. No. Encumbrances. No utility agreements. I asked her to search under Ridgewood Estates, the HOA, and microhydro systems. Nothing. No recorded easement. No permit. No agreement. No legal right to build, operate, or maintain a hydroelectric system on my property. The system was 100% illegal. I sat in my truck in the clerk's office parking lot, staring at the copies of the deed and tax records spread across the passenger seat. Aunt Claire had owned the property outright since 1987. She'd paid the taxes every year without fail. The lake, the dam, the water, it was all hers. And now it was mine. And someone had built a power system on it without asking. For over 4 years. The Ridgewood Estates HOA had been generating electricity from my water on my dam, on my land, saving themselves thousands of dollars a month in utility costs. while my aunt paid the property taxes and had no idea she was being used, and now they were going to find out that the person who owned the lake wasn't an elderly woman. In a nursing home, it was me, and I wasn't going to ignore it because the deed said the property was mine, the dam was mine, the water was mine, and the power they'd been stealing. That was mine too. I found the contact information for the Ridgewood Estates. HOA on their community website, a polished page full of photos of smiling residents, the clubhouse, and the pool. The HOA president was listed as Felicia Hartman with an email address and a phone number. I called her Tuesday morning. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and professional. Ridgewood Estates HOA, this is Felicia. Ms. Hartman, my name is Alex Bennett. I inherited the property adjacent to your community, 280 acres, including the lake and dam on the western boundary. There was a brief pause. Oh, Claire's nephew. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your aunt was a lovely woman. Did you know her? No. We met once or twice, years ago. She was very private. Did she give you permission to build a hydroelectric system on her dam? The pause was longer this time. When Felicia spoke again, her tone had shifted, still polite, but cooler. Your aunt gave us verbal permission years ago. It's a small system. Frankly, it barely affects the water flow. We've been maintaining it for years without issue. Show me the easement, I said. We don't need one. The creek feeds your lake and flows downstream to our properties. It's a shared resource. We have a right to use it. You don't have a right to build a structure on my dam, I said. That's trespassing. Felicia's voice hardened. Mr. Bennett, I understand you're new to property ownership, but let me explain how things work here. The hydroelectric system benefits the entire community. It reduces our energy costs. It's environmentally friendly, and it's been operating without incident. For over 4 years, your aunt never complained. I suggest you don't create problems where none exist. You've built on my land without permission. I want it removed. Felicia laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Removed? Do you have any idea what that system cost? We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in infrastructure. You can't just demand we tear it out because you're feeling territorial. I can if it's on my property, Mr. Bennett, Felicia said, her voice dropping into something that sounded almost like a threat. I've lived in this county for 30 years. I know the planning officials, the county commissioners, the zoning board. If you decide to make things difficult for this community, I promise you, things will become very difficult for you. I suggest you be reasonable. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, I'll be in touch, and I hung up. I called Patricia Gaines the next morning. She'd represented me in the Brennan Ranch case, the boundary dispute with Karen and the encroaching. Manchin and she'd won decisively. If anyone could handle this, it was her. Hydroelectric system on your dam, Patricia said, her voice sharp with interest. Without an easement? Nothing recorded. I checked with the county clerk. No easement. No permit, no agreement. And the HOA is claiming verbal permission from your late aunt. Yep, and when I asked for proof, the president told me they don't need permission because the water is a shared resource. Patricia was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear her mind working through the legal angles. Okay, here's what we're dealing with. They've trespassed. They've built a permanent structure on your land without consent. And they've been unjustly enriched, benefiting financially from your property without compensating you. What's the system worth? Ballpark. A small hydroelectric turbine system with inverters, batteries, and installation? Probably $350,000 to $450,000. And if it's generating 30 to 35 kilowatts continuously, that's worth $6,000 to $8,000 a month in electricity, depending on local rates. I did the math in my head. 4.5 years, that was over $300,000 in free power. They've been stealing from my aunt for 4 years, I said. Correct. And now they're stealing from you. Patricia's tone shifted into the calm, clinical precision I'd come to recognize. Here's what we do. I'll send a demand letter. Clean, professional, no emotion. 3 options. They remove the system within 30 days. They negotiate to purchase. A formal easement at fair market value, or we file suit for trespass, unjust enrichment, and removal. What if they refuse? Then we go to court, and we win. Patricia's demand letter went out Friday afternoon, sent via certified mail and email to Felicia Hartman and the Ridgewood Estates HOA Board of Directors. It was 3 pages, and it left no room for ambiguity. Unauthorized hydroelectric system, demand for removal or settlement, dear Ms. Hartman and board members. This firm represents Mr. Alex Bennett, owner of the property located at address, including the 12-acre lake, earthen dam, adjacent to your community. It has come to our client's attention that Ridgewood Estates HOA has constructed, installed, and operated a hydroelectric power generation system on my client's property without authorization, easement, or recorded agreement. Our investigation reveals the following. The system was installed in June 2019 without the knowledge or consent of the then owner. Claire Bennett, no easement permit or license has been recorded with the county. The system has been generating electricity for the HOA's common areas continuously for over 4 years, providing substantial financial benefit to the HOA at my client's expense. The installation involves permanent structures built into my client's dam, including turbine housing, piping, electrical conduit, and a utility shed, all constituting trespass. My client demands the following. Option 1. Remove the entire hydroelectric system, restore the dam to its original condition, and cease all trespassing within 30 days. Option 2. Negotiate in good faith to purchase a formal, recorded easement at fair market value, compensating my client for past unauthorized use and future rights. Option 3. Face litigation for trespass, unjust enrichment, removal of structures, and damages. Please respond within 14 days. Sincerely, Patricia Gaines-esque. The response came 8 days later, not from Felicia, but from the HOA's attorney, a man named Gerald Kowalski, with a firm in Asheville. His letter was 4 pages long, combative, got full of legal jargon designed to intimidate. The key arguments were prescriptive easement. The HOA had used the water openly, notoriously, and continuously for over 4 years. Under North Carolina law, they argued, this established a prescriptive easement, legal right acquired through long-term use. Shared resource doctrine. The creek feeding the lake also flowed downstream to properties within Ridgewood Estates. Kowalski argued the water was a shared natural resource, and that my attempt to control it was unreasonable and contrary to established water rights law. Good faith reliance. The HOA had relied on verbal permission from Claire Bennett and had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in good faith. Removing the system would constitute unjust hardship. Countersuit threat. If I pursued litigation, the HOA would countersue for interference with established infrastructure and seek damages for the cost of replacing the lost power generation. The letter ended with a veiled threat. Mr. Bennett's demands are unreasonable and unsupported by law. Should he proceed with litigation, Ridgewood Estates HOA will vigorously defend its rights and seek all available remedies, including costs and attorney's fees. I forwarded the letter to Patricia and called her an hour later. They're bluffing, she said immediately. How do you know? Because their arguments are garbage. Prescriptive easement requires hostile use, meaning they knew they didn't have permission and did it anyway. If they're claiming they had verbal permission, they can't also claim it was hostile. Those two defenses contradict each other. What about the shared resource argument? Yes, water rights can be complicated. But they're not claiming water rights, they're claiming the right to build a structure on your land. That's trespass, plain and simple. Water flowing downstream doesn't give them the right to build a dam turbine on your property. And the countersuit? Patricia laughed. Empty threat. They're trying to scare you into backing down. They know they're in the wrong. They're just hoping you don't have the stomach for a fight. I was quiet for a moment, and I said I have. The stomach? Good, Patricia said. Because we're going to win this. When we do, they're going to pay for every kilowatt they stole. I stood on the dam that evening, watching the sun set over the lake. The water was calm, dark, reflecting. The orange and pink sky. Somewhere beneath the surface, hidden inside the earthen wall, the turbines spun quietly, generating power for a community that had taken what wasn't theirs. Felicia had threatened me. Her attorney had tried to intimidate me. They'd built a legal case on contradictions and bluffs, hoping I'd fold. But I'd been through this before. The Karen and the mansion. With arrogance and entitlement and people who thought their money and their confidence gave them the right to take what belonged to someone else, they'd learned the hard way that property law doesn't care about assumptions or good intentions. It cares about the deed. And I had the deed. The lake was mine. The dam was mine. The water was mine, and the power they'd been stealing, every kilowatt, every dollar. Every hour of operation belonged to me, Felicia thought. I'd be reasonable. She was wrong, because reasonable people don't steal from their neighbors for 4 years and then threaten them when they get caught. Reasonable people ask permission. They document agreements. They respect boundaries. The HOA hadn't done any of that, and now they were going to learn what happens when the person who owns the water decides to turn it off. Patricia recommended I hire a dam safety engineer before we filed the lawsuit. If they drilled into the dam to install the turbine, there's a good chance they compromised the structure, she said. And if we can prove the dam is unsafe because of their installation, that gives us leverage in a potential emergency remedy. I found an engineer through the North Carolina Dam Safety Program, a man named Dr. Raymond Cole. A civil engineer with 30 years of experience inspecting earthen dams and hydroelectric installations. He agreed to inspect the dam and provide a written report. We met at the property on a cold morning in early December. Dr. Cole was in his 60s, methodical and serious, carrying a clipboard, a laser level, and a toolkit that looked like it. Belonged in a surgery, he spent 3 hours examining the dam. He walked the crest, measured the slope, checked the spillway, and used ground-penetrating radar to map the internal structure. Then he opened the utility shed and examined the turbine installation, the intake pipes, the outflow pipes, and the points where they penetrated the dam wall. When he finished, he sat down with me on the tailgate of his truck and went through his findings. This dam was built in the 1960s, he said. Earthen construction, compacted clay core, grass-covered slopes. It's old, but it was well built. It should have been good for another 50 years with routine maintenance. Should have been? Dr. Cole nodded. The hydroelectric installation compromised it, badly. He pulled out a diagram he'd sketched, a cross-section of the dam with the turbine pipes marked in red. He drilled 2 large-diameter pipes through the dam wall, he said. One for the intake, drawing water from the lake, and one for the outflow, discharging below the dam. Both pipes penetrate the entire width of the structure, about 40 feet. Is that a problem? It's a massive problem. When you drill through an earthen dam, you create weak points. Water can seep along the outside of the pipes, eroding the clay core from the inside. It's called piping, and it's one of the leading causes of earthen dam failures. He pointed to another section of the diagram. They didn't reinforce the penetrations. No concrete collars, no grout seals, no anti-seep measures. They just drilled the holes, shoved the pipes through, and backfilled with loose soil. What does that mean for the dam? It means the dam is actively eroding. I found micro cracks in the clay core near both penetrations. Found moisture seepage along the downstream face that shouldn't be there. And I found evidence of settlement. The dam is sagging slightly near the turbine housing, which suggests the internal structure is compromised. I stared at the diagram, trying to process what he was saying. Is it going to fail? Not today. Probably not this year. But if we get a heavy rain event sustained, rainfall that raises the lake level and increases pressure on the dam, the risk of failure goes up significantly. He looked at me. And if this dam fails, Mr. Bennett, it's going to send a wall of water downstream, straight into Ridgewood Estates. How much water? 12 acres? Average depth of 15 feet? That's roughly 60 million gallons. It would flood every home in the lower section of that community. I felt my stomach tighten. What do we do? You repair the dam? Immediately. You need to stabilize the penetrations, reinforce the core, and install proper drainage and anti-seep measures. I'd estimate $80,000 to $120,000 in repairs, depending on how much damage we find once we start excavation. In the turbine system, it needs to be deactivated during repairs. Ideally removed entirely. Every time that turbine operates, it creates flow variability through those pipes' pressure changes, flow surges. That accelerates the erosion. Dr. Cole handed me a copy of his report, 23 pages, with photos, diagrams, and a final conclusion that made my blood run cold. The dam is currently rated high risk due to unauthorized structural modifications. Immediate remediation is required to prevent catastrophic failure. Patricia filed the lawsuit the following week. The complaint was comprehensive, methodical, and devastating. Count I. TRSPA's defendant Ridgewood Estates HOA unlawfully entered plaintiff's property, constructed permanent structures on plaintiff's dam, and has continuously occupied and used said structures without permission or legal right. Count 2. Removal of unauthorized STR. U.S. plaintiff seeks a court order requiring defendant to remove all structures, including turbine housing, piping, electrical equipment, and utility shed, and to restore the dam to its original condition. Count 3. Unjust ENR as CHMNT defendant has generated electrical power valued at approximately $6,500 per month for over 4 years, totaling approximately $312,000 in benefits derived from plaintiff's property without compensation. Count 4. DAMAGS defendant's installation has caused structural damage to plaintiff's dam, requiring $80,000 to $120,000 in emergency repairs to prevent failure and flooding. Patricia attached Dr. Cole's dam safety report as Exhibit A. The lawsuit was filed in County Superior Court, and the HOA was served 3 days later. The HOA's response came from Gerald Kowalski, their attorney, and it was exactly what Patricia had predicted. A mix of weak defenses and aggressive posturing. Defense number 1, prescriptive easement, the HOA claimed. They had used the water openly and continuously for over 4 years, establishing a legal right to continue. Patricia's rebuttal. Prescriptive easement requires hostile use, meaning the user knows they don't have permission. But the HOA is simultaneously claiming they did have permission from Ms. Bennett. They can't have it both ways. Defense number 2, implied consent. Kowalski argued that because Claire Bennett never objected to the installation, she must have given implied consent. Patricia's rebuttal. Ms. Bennett was in an assisted living facility, suffering from declining health. She had no knowledge of the installation. Silence is not consent, especially when the landowner is incapacitated and unaware. Defense number 3. Undue hardship. The HOA argued that removing the system would cause undue financial hardship to the community, which relied on the power for essential services like security gates, lighting, and the clubhouse. Patricia's rebuttal. Undue hardship is not a defense to trespass. The HOA chose to build on land they didn't own. They assumed the risk. They can connect to the electrical grid like every other community. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing for January. Discovery began in late December. Patricia subpoenaed the HOA's records, board meeting minutes, emails, financial statements, and maintenance logs for the hydroelectric system. What we found was damning. Email. Number A, March 2019, 3 months before installation, from Felicia Hartman to Ridgewood HOA board subject. Hydroelectric proposal. The Bennett property has a perfect setup, private lake. Existing dam owner is elderly and rarely visits. Low risk of discovery. If we move quickly, we can have the system installed and operational before anyone notices. Cost savings will be significant. Email number 2, May 2019, from board member Tom Griffith to Felicia Hartman subject. Hydroelectric proposal. Do we need to get permission from the property owner? What if she finds out? Felicia's reply. I'll reach out to her as a courtesy, but I doubt she'll understand the technical details. Worst case, we're already installed and operational, and she's too old to fight it. Email number 3, June 2019, week of installation, from Felicia Hartman to J. Hayes maintenance contractor subject. Access to Bennett Dam. Use the service road from the east side. No need to contact the owner. She's in a facility and won't know. Keep it low profile. The emails made it clear. The HOA knew Claire was elderly, knew she was unlikely to notice, and deliberately installed the system without asking because they believed she wouldn't be able to stop them. The maintenance logs were just as bad. Over 4 years, HOA contractors had accessed my property over 120 times in 20 without permission, using keys they'd made themselves, performing maintenance, and documenting it all in neat, incriminating detail. Patricia read through the emails and looked up at me, shaking her head. They knew exactly what they were doing. This isn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This is intentional trespass, calculated theft. The preliminary hearing was held on a gray January morning. Judge Susan Holloway presided, a former environmental attorney with a reputation for taking property rights and dam safety seriously. Patricia presented Dr. Cole's report and walked the judge through the findings: the compromised dam structure, the lack of reinforcement, the risk of catastrophic failure. Dr. Cole testified in person, calm and clinical. The dam is unsafe. The longer the turbine system operates, the greater the risk. If we experience a major rain event before repairs are made, the probability of failure is unacceptably high. Judge Holloway leaned forward. And if the dam fails? What happens to the properties downstream? Catastrophic flooding, Your Honor. 60 million gallons of water would inundate Ridgewood Estates within minutes. Homes, roads, infrastructure all severely damaged or destroyed. The judge looked at Gerald Kowalski. Counselor, your client built a system that's now threatening to flood their own community. How do you respond? Kowalski stammered. Your Honor, we dispute the severity of the engineer's findings. We believe the dam is structurally sound and the risk has been overstated. Do you have an engineer's report to support that? Not at this time, Your Honor. Judge Holloway made a note. Then I'm going to rely on the expert testimony before me. She ruled from the bench. Plaintiff's motion for preliminary injunction is granted. Defendant is ordered to immediately cease operation of the hydroelectric system. Plaintiff is authorized to deactivate the system and begin emergency dam repairs. A full trial on the merits will proceed in 60 days. Kowalski stood. Your Honor, if we deactivate the system, the HOA will lose power to essential services, then connect to the grid, Counselor. Your client built an illegal system on someone else's land. They don't get to keep using it while we litigate. Judge Holloway closed her folder. Order will be entered today, as hearing is adjourned. Felicia was waiting outside the courtroom when we exited. She looked smaller than she had on the phone pale, tight-lipped, furious. She stepped in front of me. You're going to destroy our community over this? I'm protecting my property, I said. We offered to negotiate. We're willing to pay for an easement. After you got caught, after you built the system, without asking, after you called me unreasonable for objecting. Felicia's voice cracked. If you shut down that system, we'll have to pay thousands of dollars a month for grid power. Do you understand what that does to our budget, to our residents? That's not my problem, I said. You built on my land. You damaged my dam. You stole power for 4 years. And now you're paying for it. Patricia stepped forward. Ms. Hartman, my client has offered to settle. Remove the system, pay damages, and we're done. If you refuse, we'll go to trial and you'll lose. And when you do, you'll owe everything: removal, repairs, back payments, attorney's fees. Walk away now or pay the full price. Felicia stared at us, her jaw tight. Then she turned and walked away without another word. I stood on the dam that evening, looking out over the lake. The turbine system was still humming below, still spinning, still generating power for a community that had stolen it, but not for long. Judge Holloway had given me the authority to shut it down, to drain the lake if necessary, to do whatever it took to repair the dam and protect my property. The HOA had refused to settle. They'd threatened me. They'd argued they had a right to the power because they'd been stealing it long enough. They were wrong. And now, the water was going to stop flowing because I owned the lake. I owned the dam. I owned every drop of water behind it, and when I drained it, your entire system would collapse. Not because I was vindictive, but because they'd built their dream infrastructure on land they didn't own, and property law doesn't care how much you invested or how long you've been there. It cares about the deed, and I had the deed. Patricia filed the emergency motion 3 days after Judge Holloway's preliminary ruling. The motion was straightforward and supported by Dr. Cole's engineering report. The dam was unsafe, repairs were urgent, and the hydroelectric system had to be deactivated immediately to prevent further structural damage. The motion requested court authorization to lower the lake level by 810 feet to expose the turbine penetrations and allow for safe repair work. Deactivate the hydroelectric system during the drawdown and repair process. Begin emergency stabilization work to reinforce the dam core and prevent failure. Dr. Cole submitted a supplemental affidavit explaining the engineering necessity. Draining the lake reduces hydrostatic pressure on the compromised dam structure, minimizing the risk of failure during repairs. The turbine system cannot operate safely during this process and must be deactivated to prevent flow surges that could worsen the erosion. Judge Holloway reviewed the motion and granted it the same day. Order granting emergency RAL plaintiff is hereby authorized to lower the water level of the subject lake by up to 10 feet to facilitate emergency dam repairs. Plaintiff may deactivate the defendant's hydroelectric system as necessary to complete said repairs. Defendant is enjoined from interfering with plaintiff's repair work. I had the court's permission. Now, I just had to do it. I hired a dam contractor, regional firm called Blue Ridge Dam Services that specialized in earthen dam repairs and lake management. The lead engineer, a woman named Marissa Chen, met me at the property the following Monday to assess the work. She walked the dam with Dr. Cole's report in hand, examined the turbine installation, and nodded grimly. We can fix this, but we need to drain the lake first. The turbine intake is about 12 feet below the current water line. If we drop the lake 10 feet, we'll expose the penetration points and have safe working access. How long will the drawdown take? 72 hours, give or take? We'll open the existing spillway valve and let it drain in a controlled manner. The water will flow downstream through the creek same path it always takes, just at a higher volume for a few days. And the turbine? Marissa smiled. Once the water level drops below the intake, the system stops working. No water, no power. We began the drawdown on a Wednesday morning in late January. Marissa's crew opened the spillway valve at the base of the dam, a large manual gate that controlled outflow, and the water started flowing at first. It was subtle. The lake level didn't seem to change. But by midday, you could see the water line receding, exposed mud and rocks appearing along the shore like the lake was slowly exhaling. I stood on the dam, watching the water pour through the spillway and cascade down into the creek below. The sound was constant, a deep, steady roar that echoed through the valley. By evening, the lake had dropped 2 feet. By the next morning, 5 feet. And by Thursday afternoon, water level had fallen far enough that the turbine intake, previously submerged 12 feet below the surface, was now exposed. Jutting out from the side of the dam, like a metal wound, the hydroelectric system stopped, generating power at 3:47 p.m. Know the exact time because that's when my phone started ringing. The first call was from a Ridgewood resident I didn't know, a man who sounded panicked. Are you the guy who owns the lake? Yes. Did you shut off the power? The gates aren't working. The clubhouse is dark. What the hell is going on? I'm repairing my dam. The turbine system had to be deactivated. How long? As long as it takes? He hung up. The second call was from Felicia. Her voice was tight, controlled, barely masking fury. Mr. Bennett, you need to stop what you're doing immediately. I'm repairing my dam, Ms. Hartman. The court authorized it. You're sabotaging our community. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've deactivated an illegal power system that was damaging my property. Our gates are stuck open. Our pool heating is offline. The streetlights aren't working. You're creating a safety hazard. Then connect to the electrical grid. I said, like every other community in the county. Felicia's voice rose. This is intentional. You're punishing us because we wouldn't settle on your terms. This is vindictive, and I will make sure you pay for every dollar of damage you cause. Ms. Hartman, I have a court order. If you have a problem with it, Take it up with Judge Holloway. Hung up. Felicia showed up at the property Friday morning with 2 other HOA board members and Gerald Kowalski, their attorney. I was standing near the spillway, watching Marissa's crew set up scaffolding along the dam face to begin the repair work. Felicia marched up to me, her face red, her voice sharp. "You can't do this." "I can't. The court said so. You're sabotaging our community. Do you understand what you've done? You've lost power to essential infrastructure. The clubhouse, the pool, the gates, everything. You built that infrastructure on stolen power," I said. "From my property, without permission, for 4 years. Gerald Kowalski stepped forward, trying to inject some professionalism into the confrontation. "Mr. Bennett, we understand you have concerns about the dam, but this drawdown is causing substantial harm to my client. We're prepared to negotiate a temporary agreement to restore power while repairs are ongoing." "No," I said. "You're not even willing to discuss it. Your client had for years to discuss it. They chose not to, built on my land, damaged my dam, and threatened me when I objected. Now I'm fixing the problem they created. They want power. They can pay the electric company." One of the board members, a man in his 50s, visibly stressed, spoke up. "You have any idea what this is costing us? We're having to pay for emergency generator rentals just to keep the gates functional. The residents are furious. People are threatening to sue the HOA. That's your problem," I said. "You built a system on land you didn't own. You gambled you wouldn't get caught. You lost." Felicia's voice was shaking now, a mix of rage and something close to desperation. "You're destroying us over a technicality. We made one mistake, and you're using it to ruin an entire community." "It wasn't one mistake," I said. "You knew my aunt was elderly. You knew she wouldn't notice. You installed the system without asking because you thought you could get away with it. When I showed up, you didn't apologize. You didn't offer to make it right. You threatened me." I looked at Kowalski. "Your client had a chance to settle. Remove the system, pay damages, walk away. They refused. So now we're here." Patricia, who'd been standing quietly near my truck, stepped forward. "Miss Hartman, the drawdown is court approved. The system was illegal. Your client has no legal claim to water or power from a private lake they don't own. If you continue to interfere with the repairs, we'll file for contempt." Felicia stared at Patricia, then at me, her jaw tight. Her hands were trembling. "This isn't over?" "Yes, it is," Patricia said. "You just don't want to admit it." Felicia turned and started walking back toward the access road, but she only made it a few steps before she stopped, swaying slightly. One of the board members reached out to steady her. "Felicia." She took another step, then collapsed, her legs buckling, her body hitting the ground hard. The board member dropped to his knees beside her. "Felicia, someone call 911. Kowalski was already on his phone, stood frozen for a moment, then moved toward them. Marissa's crew came running. "She breathing?" I asked. "Yes, but she's not responsive." I knelt down next to her. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. Stress, rage, exhaustion, whatever it was, it had caught up to her. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. The paramedic stabilized her, loaded her onto a stretcher, and took her to the hospital. Kowalski followed in his car, and the 2 remaining board members left shortly after. Shaken and silent, Patricia and I stood near the dam, watching them go. "That was ugly," I said. "She brought it on herself." Patricia replied. "She gambled. Lost. And now she's paying the price." I looked out over the lake. The water level was still dropping, the exposed shoreline growing wider by the hour. The turbine intake hung useless and silent, no longer fed by the water that had powered it for over 4 years. Ridgewood Estates was dark. The gates were stuck, open. The pool was cold, the streetlights were off, and somewhere downstream, an entire community was realizing that the power they'd taken for granted, the power they'd built their infrastructure around, had never been theirs to begin with. It had been mine, and now it was gone. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because they'd built their system on land they didn't own. And when the owner showed up and demanded they remove it, they'd refused. So I drained the lake, and their power died with it. Because property law doesn't care. About your clubhouse, your gates, your convenience. It cares about the deed. And I had the deed. Felicia spent 2 days in the hospital, exhaustion, elevated blood pressure, acute stress reaction. She resigned from the HOA board a week later, citing health concerns, and was replaced by a retired engineer named David Moss, who'd been vocal in his criticism of the hydroelectric project from the beginning. David's first act as interim president was to call Patricia and ask to settle. "I wasn't on the board when they installed that system," David said over the phone. "I voted against it when they brought it up in 2019. I told them it was reckless and probably illegal. They didn't listen. Now we're here, and I want to fix it." "Patricia." Put him on speaker so I could hear. "What are you proposing?" "We'll remove the system. We'll pay for the dam repairs. We'll compensate Mr. Bennett for the trespass. Just tell us what you want, and let's end this." Patricia looked at me. I nodded. "Give me 24 hours, Patricia said. "I'll send you a settlement offer," Patricia drafted the settlement demand that evening. It was clean, precise, and non-negotiable. Settlement, TER, mess removal of hydroelectric system. Ridgewood Estates HOA shall remove all equipment, structures, and piping related to the hydroelectric system, at their sole cost and expense. Estimated cost, $60,000. Removal to be completed within 60 days. Damages for unjust enrichment and trespass. Shall pay $150,000 to compensate Mr. Bennett for 4 years of unauthorized use of his property and the electrical power generated therefrom. Dam repair costs. HOA shall pay $95,000 to cover the cost of emergency dam repairs necessitated by the unauthorized installation. Attorney's fees and costs. HOA shall pay $40,000 to reimburse Mr. Bennett's legal expenses. Total settlement amount, $345. OOO payment. To be made in full within 30 days of execution of settlement agreement. Upon receipt of payment and completion of system removal, plaintiff will dismiss all claims with prejudice. David called back the next afternoon. "We need to negotiate." "No," Patricia said. $345,000 is a significant financial burden for our community. "Can we discuss a payment plan or a reduction in the damages?" "No. Your predecessors built on my client's land without permission. They damaged his dam. They threatened him when he objected. They forced him into litigation. This is what it costs. We can't negotiate. We'll have to assess the homeowners. It's going to cause serious problems." "That's an internal matter for your HOA," Patricia said. "My client's terms are final. Accept them or go to trial. But I promise you, if we go to trial, the judgment will be higher." David was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I'll take it to the board." The Ridgewood Estates HOA held an emergency meeting 3 days later. David presented the settlement terms to the full board, and the assembled homeowners, over 100 people, packed into the clubhouse, which was now running on rented generators at $800 a day. I wasn't there, but Patricia got a recording of the meeting from a friendly homeowner who was outraged by the whole situation. David explained the facts calmly. The system was illegal, the lawsuit was unwinnable, and the settlement was the least expensive option available. "If we go to trial and lose," David said, "we'll owe everything in the settlement plus additional court costs and penalties. The judge has already ruled against us on the preliminary injunction. Our attorney has advised that we have no viable defense." One homeowner stood up, furious. "Why didn't anyone tell us about this? We had no idea the board installed that system." David looked uncomfortable. Previous board approved it in a closed session. It was never brought to a general vote. "That's illegal," another homeowner shouted. "Ow!" "They can't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars without membership approval." "You're right," David said. "And that's something we'll address internally. But right now we have to settle this lawsuit or we'll face a judgment that could bankrupt the HOA." Another homeowner. "So what are you asking us to pay?" David pulled up a slide showing the math. "The settlement is $345,000. Divided equally among 140 homes. That's $2,464 per household. Payable within 30 days. The room erupted. "I'm not paying for something I didn't approve. This is outrageous. Should sue the old board members." David raised his hands, trying to restore order. "I understand your frustration. But But the alternative is worse. If we don't settle and we lose at trial, the assessment could be double or triple this amount. We have no choice. The board called for a vote. It passed barely. 78 votes in favor, 62 against. Ridgewood Estates would pay the settlement. The backlash was immediate. Within a week, 3 former board members, including Felicia, were named in a lawsuit filed by a group of angry homeowners, alleging breach of fiduciary duty, mismanagement, and unauthorized expenditure of HOA funds. Felicia's attorney issued a statement saying she acted in good faith based on the information available at the time. But the lawsuit moved forward anyway. Several homeowners put their properties up for sale, unwilling to stay in a community that had just levied a $2,464 special assessment for an illegal project they'd never voted on. Property values in Ridgewood Estates dropped 8% in 2 months. The settlement was executed in early March. The HOA wired $345,000 to Patricia's trust account, and the funds were dispersed according to the agreement. $60,000 held in escrow, pending completion of system removal, $150,000 paid to me for damages, $95,000 paid directly to Blue Ridge Dam Services for repairs, $40,000 paid to Patricia for attorney's fees. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. The case was over. The removal crew arrived 2 weeks later, specialized contractor hired by the HOA to dismantle the hydroelectric system. It took them 6 days. They drained the remaining water from the turbine housing, cut the intake and outflow pipes, removed the inverters and battery banks, and demolished the concrete structure at the base of the dam. They hauled away over 12 tons of equipment and debris, leaving nothing but clean earth and exposed clay where the system had once been. Maurice's crew followed immediately after, beginning the dam repairs. They excavated the penetration points, installed concrete collars and grout seals, reinforced the clay core with compacted fill, and graded the slopes to prevent erosion. The work took 5 weeks and cost exactly $94,800, just under the $95,000 the HOA had paid. When it was done, Dr. Cole returned to inspect the repairs and certify the dam. His final report was brief and conclusive. Dam has been repaired to meet current safety standards. All structural deficiencies have been corrected. Dam is rated low risk and approved for refilling. We refilled the lake in mid-April. MRSA closed. The spillway valve and the water began to rise, slowly at first, then faster as the spring rains came and the creek swelled with runoff. Within 2 weeks, the lake was back to its original level. The exposed shoreline disappeared. The water was dark and still again, reflecting the sky and the trees. I stood on the dam one evening, watching the sun set over the water. The lake looked exactly as it had when I'd first inherited it, quiet, remote, untouched. But now the turbine was gone. The power line was gone. The trespassers were gone, and the dam was safe. David Moss called me a few weeks later, his tone respectful, almost apologetic. I wanted to let you know the system has been fully removed, and the funds have been transferred. We've upheld our end of the settlement. I know, I said. I've been monitoring the work. I also wanted to apologize on behalf of the HOA. What the previous board did was wrong. You had every right to protect your property, and we should never have put you in that position. I appreciate that. If there's ever anything we can do, if you ever need access to the road, or help with maintenance, or anything, just let us know. We're neighbors, and we'd like to stay on good terms. I'll keep that in mind, I said. David hesitated. For what it's worth, a lot of homeowners here are furious about what happened. Several of us never knew about the hydroelectric system until the lawsuit was filed. We're holding the old board accountable. Good, I said. They made a choice. Now, they're paying for it. They are, David agreed. We all are. I walked the property one last time before heading home that evening. The lake was full, the dam was repaired, and the forest was quiet, except for the sound of wind through the yew, pines and the occasional splash of a base breaking the surface. The HOA had gambled that a reclusive, elderly woman would never notice their system. They'd gambled that her heir wouldn't care or wouldn't fight. They'd lost that gamble, and it had cost them. $345,000, their board leadership, their reputation, and the trust of their own community because they'd built a system on land they didn't own, powered by water they had no right to use, and when the owner showed up and said remove it, they'd refused, so I drained the lake, and their power collapsed with it. Not because I wanted revenge, but because property law doesn't care about your infrastructure, your investment, or your convenience. It cares about the deed. I owned the lake. I owned the dam. I owned the water, and when I turned it off, the HOA learned a lesson they should have known from the beginning. You can't steal power from land you don't own. And when the owner shows up, the water stops flowing. The lake was mine. The dam was mine. Every drop of water behind was mine. And now finally everyone knew it because the deed said so. The new Ridgewood Estates Board was elected in May, as complete turnover from the old leadership. David Moss remained as president. But the rest of the board was replaced by homeowners who'd been vocal critics of the hydroelectric project, and who'd campaigned on transparency and accountability. Their first official act was to send me a letter. It arrived by certified mail, handwritten on HOA letterhead, signed by all 5 board members. Dear Mr. Bennett, we are the newly elected board of Ridgewood Estates. We write to express our sincere apologies for the actions of our predecessors. The unauthorized installation of the hydroelectric system on your property was wrong. It's illegal, and a violation of the trust our community places in its leadership. We had no knowledge of the project till the lawsuit was filed. Many of us voted against the previous board specifically because of this issue. We want you to know that the current board does not condone what was done, and we are committed to ensuring nothing like this ever happens again. The settlement has been paid in full, and the system has been removed. We hope that we can move forward as respectful neighbors. If there is anything we can do to rebuild trust, please let us know. Sincerely, the Board of Directors. Ridgewood Estates HOA. I read the letter twice, then filed it with the rest of the settlement documents. It was a genuine apology, more than I'd expected. Honestly, but the damage had already been done. I didn't respond. A few weeks later, David Moss called me directly. I know you got our letter, he said. I wanted to follow up personally. Is there anything we can do to make this right? Beyond the settlement, I mean? Any gesture that would help repair the relationship between our communities? The settlement is final, I said. The system is gone. The dam is repaired. As far as I'm concerned, the matter is closed. I understand. But we're neighbors. We share a boundary. And I'd hate for this to define our relationship going forward. I thought about that for a moment. If you want renewable energy, build it. On your land, there's plenty of sun. Install solar panels. But don't ever assume you have access to my property, my water, or my resources without asking first. Fair enough, David said. And for what it's worth, we've already started looking into solar for the clubhouse and common areas. We're not making that mistake again. Good. There was a pause. Then David said, some of our homeowners have asked if they could approach you about recreational access to the lake. Not the HOA, individual families. Would you be open to that? Depends on the ask, I said. A few families have kids who fish. They can see the lake from their backyards, and they've asked if there's any way they could use it occasionally. Not permanently. Just ... respectfully. Tell them to contact me directly, I said. In writing. If they're polite and respectful, I'll consider it. Thank you, David said. It's more than generous, given everything. Over the next 2 months, I received 4 handwritten letters from Ridgewood homeowners. Letter number 1 is from a couple in their 30s with 2 young kids. They explained that their boys loved fishing and had been watching the lake from their backyard for years, asking if they could go. They promised to follow any rules I set, clean up after themselves, and respect the property. I granted them a limited recreational access license, fishing from the shore only, weekends and holidays. No motorized boats, revocable at my discretion. I had Patricia draft the agreement, and we recorded it with the county. The family sent me a thank you card and a basket of homemade jam. Letter number 2 was from a retired teacher who kayaked for exercise. She asked if she could use the lake twice a week. early mornings, when no one else was around. She offered to help maintain the shoreline and pick up any trash she found. I granted her the same type of license, with the additional condition that she text me before each visit so I'd know when someone was on the property. She followed the rules perfectly. Letter number 3 was from a man who wanted to bring his church youth group to the lake for team-building activities and baptisms. I declined, politely but firmly. Too many people, too much liability, too much risk of damage. Letter number 4 was from a woman who wanted to host her daughter's wedding reception on the shore of the lake. It's such a beautiful setting. We'd pay you, of course. I declined that one too. The lake wasn't a venue. It was private property, and I intended to keep it that way. The word spread through Ridgewood. If you approached respectfully, asked in writing, and followed the rules, I'd consider access. You assumed, demanded, or acted entitled. The answer was no. It was simple, clear, and it worked. A few homeowners grumbled that I was being difficult or unneighborly, but they were in the minority. Most people understood the previous board had poisoned the relationship by stealing from me, and I was under no obligation to be generous. The fact that I was willing to grant any access documented, limited, revocable, was more than they had a right to expect. I spent more time at the property that summer. The cabin Aunt Claire had left was small but comfortable, and I started fixing it up. New roof, new windows, fresh paint. It became a weekend retreat, a place to decompress and disconnect. I'd sit on the dock in the evenings, watching the sun set over the water. And occasionally I'd see one of the Ridgewood families on the far shore kids fishing, the retired teacher, paddling quietly in her kayak, always respectful, always keeping their distance. It was peaceful, and it was mine. David Moss stopped by one afternoon in late summer. Unannounced but polite, he knocked on the cabin door and waited until I came out. "Wanted to thank you," he said, "for working with some of our families." "I know you didn't have to," they asked politely, I said. "That makes a difference." David nodded. "The old board thought they could take what they wanted because your aunt wouldn't notice. They gambled, they lost, and the whole community paid for it. That's what happens when you build on someone else's land," I said. "Lesson learned?" David said. "Painfully, but learned." He handed me a small box. "This is from the board. It's not much, but we wanted to give you something as a gesture of goodwill." I opened the box. Inside was a handcrafted wooden sign, engraved, with the words, "Bennett, Lake, Private Property, EST, 1963. We had it made by a local craftsman," David said. "Thought you might want to post it near the access road. Let people know whose land they're looking at." I turned the sign over in my hands. It was well made, thoughtful. "Thank you." "Thank you," David said, "for not making this worse than it had to be." I mounted the sign at the entrance to the property the following weekend. It sat at the fork where the access road split one path leading to my cabin, the other leading toward the Ridgewood boundary. Bennett Lake Private Property. Est, 1963. It was a reminder. Not hostile, not aggressive, just clear. This land had an owner. This lake had an owner. And if you wanted access, you asked. You didn't assume, you didn't take. You didn't build a $400,000 power system and hope no one would notice. You asked. And if you were respectful, there was a chance I'd say yes. But if you weren't, if you threatened, if you lied, if you tried to steal, you'd learn the same lesson the old Ridgewood board had learned. Property law doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care about your investment. It doesn't care how long you've been there or how much you need it. It cares about the deed. And I had the deed. The lake was mine. The dam was mine. The water was mine. And now, finally, everyone respected that because they'd seen what happened when they didn't. The power stopped flowing, the system collapsed, and the people who'd built it paid $345,000 to learn a lesson they should have known from the beginning. Respect boundaries. Ask permission. And never assume access to someone else's property, because when the owner shows up and says no, The law doesn't care how much you've invested or how inconvenient it is. It just asks one question: who owns the land? And if the answer is someone else, you have no rights. None. The Ridgewood board learned that the hard way. But the new board and the families who'd approached respectfully learned to get the right way, and that made all the difference. I stood on the dam one evening in late September, watching the sun set over Bennett Lake. The water was calm, reflecting the gold and amber light. The surface broken occasionally by the rise of a base or the ripple of wind across the valley. Dam beneath my feet was solid, now repaired, reinforced, certified safe. The turbine penetrations had been sealed. The erosion had been stopped. The structure that had been rated high risk 6 months ago was now graded low risk and built to last another 50 years. The lake was full. The forest was quiet. The only sound was the gentle overflow of water through the spillway, flowing downstream the way it always had naturally, cleanly. Without the hum of turbines or the theft of power, it was exactly as it should be. I thought about the whole ordeal, the discovery, the confrontation, the lawsuit, the drainage, the collapse. The Ridgewood Estates HOA had looked at this lake and seen an opportunity. A remote, private body of water, owned by an elderly woman who rarely visited and probably wouldn't notice if someone installed a small hydroelectric system. They'd gambled she'd never find out. If she did, they'd gambled she'd be too old, too confused, or too intimidated to fight back. They'd built a $400,000 power system on that gamble. They'd generated electricity for over 4 years, powering their clubhouse, their pool, their gates, their lights, all on stolen water from stolen land, and they'd saved themselves tens of thousands of dollars a year by not paying the electric company. But the gamble had a flaw. Property doesn't care who's using it, it cares who owns it. And when Aunt Claire died and I inherited the lake, the gamble collapsed. Because I wasn't an elderly woman in a nursing home. I wasn't confused. I wasn't intimidated. I was a landowner who understood property law, and I had an attorney who knew how to enforce it. The HOA had tried every defense they could think of. Prescriptive easement. We've used the water openly for years, so we have a legal right to it. The court said no. Prescriptive easement requires hostile use, meaning you know you don't have permission and you do it anyway. But the HOA claimed they did have permission from Aunt Claire. They couldn't have it both ways. Implied consent. She never objected, so she must have agreed. The court said no. Aunt Claire was in an assisted living facility with declining health. She had no knowledge of the installation. Silence isn't consent when the landowner doesn't know what's happening. Shared resource. The water flows through our properties too, so we have a right to use it. The court said no. Water flowing downstream doesn't give you the right to build a structure on someone else's dam. Undue hardship. Removing the system will cost us too much. The court said no. You built on land you didn't own. You assumed the risk. The hardship is your problem, not the landowners. Every argument failed, because none of them addressed the only question that mattered. Who owns the land? Was me? Property law is slow. It's technical. It's built on deeds and surveys and recorded documents that go back decades. But it's also unforgiving. It doesn't care if you built a $400,000 hydroelectric system. It doesn't care if 140 families benefit from the power. It doesn't care if removal is expensive or inconvenient, or if it disrupts your community. It cares about the deed. I owned the lake. I owned the dam. I owned the water. And when the HOA refused to remove their system, I drained the lake, not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because the dam was unsafe. The repairs required it, and the court gave me permission. And when the water level dropped below the turbine intake, their entire system collapsed. The power stopped flowing. The gates stuck open. The pool went cold. The lights went dark, and Ridgewood Estates learned a lesson they should have known from the beginning. You can't steal power from land you don't own. And when the owner shows up, the water stops flowing. The HOA paid $345,000 to settle. They removed the system. They funded the repairs. They replaced their board. And they issued an apology, but the real cost was higher than money. Property values in Ridgewood Estates dropped. Homeowners sued the old board members. Families who'd had no knowledge of the illegal system were forced to pay special assessments to cover the settlement, and the reputation of the community, the trust between the board and its members, was shattered. All because the previous board thought they could take what wasn't theirs and get away with it. They couldn't, because property law doesn't reward theft. It doesn't reward arrogance. And it doesn't reward people who build infrastructure on someone else's land and then refuse to leave when the owner says no. It rewards the person with the deed, and I had the deed. I walked down from the dam toward the cabin as the last light faded from the sky. The lake was dark now, the water still, the air cool with the promise of autumn. The hydroelectric system was gone. The power line was gone. The trespassers were gone, and the lake was mindfully, legally, undeniably mine. Every drop of water, behind the dam, every kilowatt of power it could generate. Every fish that swam beneath the surface, mine, not because I took it. Not because I fought for it, but because Aunt Claire left it to me. Because the deed was recorded. Because the law recognized my ownership and enforced it. When someone tried to steal from me, the HOA had thought this lake was free for the taking. They were wrong. And they paid $345,000 to learn that lesson. I sat on the cabin porch that night, looking out over the water. The moon rose over the ridge, casting silver light across the lake, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called through the trees. The lake was clean, the dam was safe. The boundaries were clear, and every neighbor who'd approached respectfully, asked permission, who'd followed the rules, who'd treated my property like it belonged to someone who'd been welcomed. But the ones who'd assumed, who'd taken, who'd threatened and lied, they'd learned the hard way, because property law is simple, even if people try to complicate it. It asks one question: who owns the land? And when the answer is clear, everything else falls into place. The Ridgewood Estates, HOA, thought they could build a system on my land because the owner was old and wouldn't notice. They thought wrong, and when I drained the lake, their power collapsed, not because I was cruel, but because they'd built their entire infrastructure on a foundation they didn't own. And when the water stopped flowing, they finally understood what property law had been telling them all along. Respect the water, respect the land, respect the deed. Because if you don't, the person who owns it will make you the legal way, the expensive way, the only way that matters. I stood on the dam one last time before heading inside, looking out over the dark water, feeling the weight and the peace of ownership. The lake was mine. The dam was mine. Every drop of water, every acre of land, every kilowatt of power it could generate, mine, not the HOA's, not the neighbors, not the people who thought they could take it. Without asking, just mine, because the deed said so. And in property law, that's the only thing that matters.